Chavre, was macht ihr? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmus und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Re'eh, and it's also Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Elul. And we'll speak about the general significance of the month of Elul and its importance in Jewish life, the connection to Parshas HaShavua, and concepts that relate to the very essence and the heart of Judaism. Before we begin, we'll start with a prayer as usual. V'ani tzilosi l'cho adinoi eis rotzein Elihim b'rav chazdech v'aneni b'emes yishecho. May my prayer to you, Lord, be at a propitious time. Hashem, in your abounding kindness, answer me with your true deliverance. So we're saying, b'rav chazdecha, in your abounding kindness. We turn to Hashem, to his abounding kindness, because that's really what lays at the heart of the connection and the bond between the Yid and Hashem, the kindness and the love. And this is the connection, straight away, to Shabbos Mevorchim Elul. In Chabad, Lubavitch, Hasidim talk about Elul already from the Shabbos Mevorchim. And this is based on a talk of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who he, in general, gave us a glimpse always of the old school, in the Alter Heim, the way life was by his father and by his grandfather and by his great-grandfathers. And what he said was that in the town of Lubavitch, where Lubavitcher Hasidim lived for 102 years, he said, in Lubavitch, von Shabbos Mevorchim Elul hat sich schon gefühlt die Tshuva, hat sich geblost die Tshuva Wind. From Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, the winds of Tshuva were already blowing. And I think it says it over there, but it's known a Jewish saying that from Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, the fish in the pond already felt the Elul. So, being that is the case, so we're going into Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, we already have to talk about Elul, and what Elul means, and how essential and supreme it is in the service of Hashem. What's Elul? Elul stands for the Rosh Tevis, primarily the most famous one. Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. And, you know, in modern language, sometimes the people say an expression, you know, about them and the one that they love, their wife, you know, and the husband will say, you know, I love her, she loves me, or she loves me, I love her, enough said. There's nothing to add to that. If there's really a pledge of loyalty, devotion, love, and care and concern, all you have to say is, Ani l'doidi, and v'doidi li. And that encapsulates everything. And I want to read you from the words of the Rebbe, from a talk that he gave in Tafshin Nun, and I'm going to read it to you in Yiddish, and it's the first page of that Sikha, that talk of Parshas Re'eh, Tafshin Nun. And he says, Elul represents something fundamental and general in our service of Avodas Hashem. And he says, as it's alluded to in Rosh Tevis of Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, which is the general intent of all, the general intent, the content of all of our Avodas Hashem. As Zayin Metzias Ani, that his very being, his Ani, his I, so Zayin verbunden und vereinzigt mit dem Eibishten, should be bound up and one with Hashem, doidi. But you have to stress, doidi, meloshin yedidus va'ava, a word that represents friendship, kinship, affection, and love. Anonter und tiefer Verbund, a close and deep bond von Liebschaft, of love. Und der Verbund ist auf zwei Fallen, it's a two-way street, the bond works both ways. Anilo doidi, die Yesodis von Haiden, was zieht sich und bindt sich mit an Ava zu dem Eibishten, the arousal and stimulation on the part of the Yid, that he's drawn and binds himself with a love to Hashem, durch dienen im Torah mitzvahs, through serving Hashem with Torah mitzvahs, all out of love. Und v'doidi li, the Amshacha Mitech Ava from the Eibishn to Yidden. The way Hashem draws to us and is drawn to us out of love from Hashem to us. So here we see that this overriding idea of Hashem's love to us is really the driving force of the whole month of Elul, but in truth that's really the driving force of everything. It's all about the love, and that is true. That is true. We have to add a lot to that. There's a Chumash, there's a Shulchan Aruch, yes. But in a certain sense, if we strip it away from everything, it's Ahavti eschem omer Hashem. Hashem says, I love you. Machshavton shel Yisrael kodma l'chol davar. The thoughts of the Jews come before everything else, and we'll speak about it. And by the way, this was one of the main innovations of the Baal Shem Tov that he stressed again and again. And this was one of the main contributions of Chassidus, that before the Baal Shem Tov came along, for some reason, this concept was for some reason a bit concealed. And he traveled the country, Russia, Poland, and he told everyone, Hashem loves you. And he gave the analogy, which is known, I'm just going to read the original, which always says, that he gave the analogy, the statement of the Baal Shem Tov, Yeder Id is tired by the Meibish, and every single Jew is precious and cherished by Hashem. Ben Yochid, as an only child, was his Gibarim Gevarim by Elton and Le'ezer Knusam, that was born to the parents when they were already old. Unoch Tayre, and even more than that, because no matter how much you're going to describe a love of a father to a child, the father is limited, the child is limited, so we're speaking about mortals, so the love ultimately is limited. But if we're talking about God, we say Hashem loves you more than your father loves you, more than your mother loves you, more than your father and mother loves you, even if you were an only child born to them when they were 60 years old, etc. That's what the Baal Shem Tov went around preaching, talking non-stop. The Baal Shem Tov's Torah, there's another talk of the Friedrich Rebbe where he says that the Baal Shem Tov, all the Baal Shem Tov was about, all of his teachings, everything was to show the Gewalt von Hayid, the enormity of a Jew, how awesome a Jew is. So it's all about the idea of what Hayid is, what is a Jew. So in this week's Parsha, we have the Pasuk, which in a way says it all. Not all, but almost all. And today's share is going to be a bit different than usual. First, we'll start with the Pasuk and how it's explained according to Pshat. And then we'll learn a piece of Tanya, the most basic piece of Tanya, chapter 2, which speaks about what is a Jew. So, and that Pasuk is, by now you might have guessed it already if you learned some Chumash this week, and that's in Parshas Re'eh, Kapitel Yudalit, Pasuk Aleph. Bonim atem Hashem elikeichem. You are children to Hashem. Lo yishes goydedu, you shall not cut yourselves. V'lo yisesimu korcha beineinechem lames, and you shall not make a bald spot between your eyes for a dead person. And over here, the pasuk says, Bonim atem Hashem elikeichem, and it continues with what I just said. You shouldn't show excessive signs of mourning, mutilation, so to speak, to the body. And then it continues with laws of kashrus. So, over here, obviously, one could ask a general question. Why is the Torah over here specifically tell us, Boni matem Hashem elikeichem? We could say that this idea of Boni matem Hashem elikeichem is really something that precedes the Torah. Machshavton shel Yisrael kodma l'chol davar. It comes before everything. And there's other places in Torah where this concept is alluded to. But really, let's just direct it to right over here. Why here does the pasuk tell us, Boni matem Hashem elikeichem? Why here? So first I'll explain the way the Pashto Pshat is. So let's start with Rashi. Rashi says over here on the words, Lo yisis goydedu, Lo yisitnu gedida, you shall not make a cutting, v'sheret or a scratch b'vsarchem in your flesh, I'll mess over a dead person, in a way that the Amorites do, because you are children of the omnipresent. V'atem ruyim liyos noyim, and you are fit to be handsome, v'lei gedudim, or made bald. And not cut or make bald. So, if you're learning this without chassidus and without really thinking too much, it's just a statement. Hashem says you're like a prince. So therefore, your appearance has to be worthy, has to be royal. So therefore, you can't debase yourself, you can't abuse yourself, and therefore you have to always look as royalty. As he says over here, "Vatem ruyim liyos noyim." You are fit to be handsome because you're children of Hashem. Fine. But now let's take it a bit further before we get to the chassidus. And over here we could say a tremendous, tremendous lesson. You know, when we speak about people, they say desperate times call for desperate measures. So the truth is, how can you tell a person, like there's another expression, bekisei, bekaisei, ubekisei, you know, which means the measure of a man is how he handles his drinks. The measure of a man is how he handles his wallet. If he loses money, what's his reaction? Or when it comes to business, is he an animal, greedy, or he's generous? There's another thing, how do you measure a man? According to how much he's searching for kavod, he's seeking kavod, glory and honor. So there's different ways that you measure a man. Alas, alas, alas. One of the ways that push man to the limits like nothing else is tragedies. What's the ultimate sacrifice? What's the ultimate price? Hashem Yirachem, no Jew should have to pay it. Is the loss of life. So here we're dealing, I would say, with the number one issue where man is put to the test. And that's when it comes to grief, when it comes to mourning. Here the pasuk tells us, Bani matem Hashem alekechem. The most basic thing you should realize, Hashem is the source of everything, and you are his children. When you believe that you have a father, and the father is looking after you in a loving way, so then you could handle what life shoots at you, what life throws at you. Even if it's sometimes the worst penalty. Hashem Yirachem, Nishtav ken yidin gedacht. And that's why the pasuk tells us over here, Boni matem Hashem alikechem. Everything Hashem does is out of love. And even when we come to the ultimate expression of human limitations, when it comes to situations of grief and mourning and pain, and the worst kind of pain imaginable. But if a person lives with Bani matem Hashem alikechem, we have a father, and he loves every single one of us as his children. And even though it's hard to accept, Baruch Dayan Emes, we should never have to say it again. No Jew should have to say it again, ever. Mashiach now. But even if someone goes through such an experience, he has to know, Bani matem Hashem alikechem. There's Hashem over here, you are his children. It was all for a purpose. There's meaning behind it. Your tears are for a meaning. Your grief is for a meaning. Your mourning is a meaning. And precious to Hashem. And the only reason it had to happen is because it had to happen. And then, out of that comes also, who defines the measure of grieving? Who defines the level of mourning? Who defines when there's a healthy mourning or not a healthy mourning? Who knows what's going on with the neshamas? And what's going on throughout all the worlds? Like the Rebbe wrote to many people who are over excessive in the morning, and the Rebbe would write to the person and tell the person, this is not good for the neshama of the one who passed away. Because they want to look down from heaven and see you smiling right now. Or that's why we have a prescription from Torah, Shiva, Shloishim, Ashana, Vavelus. And the same thing's over here. Don't mutilate yourself. You're mutilating yourself is causing pain to the one who passed, the one you're grieving over. Because you're not the one who's the expert and the connoisseur to know what's going on in spiritual worlds. And you're not the one who's the arbitrator to decide what's healthy grief and what's not healthy grief. The Torah is, Hashem knows, Bani matem Hashem alikechem. Besides everything that Rashi says, because mutilating yourself does not look honorable. We're going much deeper than that. We're saying that once you're dealing and it's a relationship with the Father who loves you, your whole response is a different response. And to take it in a more simple level, just like we the way we spoke now, I went to a deeper way, but on a simple level, that's also part of Bonei Matem Lashem Elokeichem. Speak to parents today in the secular world, and this is a very big issue, self-harm by teenagers, and they want to do all sorts of things, but the father's trying to tell the teenager, it's not good for you. You think you want to do this, but you might regret it later. And the next thing comes kashrus. The same thing is with kashrus. Food, the diet. Most parents today are very health conscious. My mother was not health conscious. Today you look at a food, carbohydrates, sugar, gluten, who knows what. And parents bring up the children much more with healthy food. The kid's going to say, why can't I just have sugar all day, bubble gum, and candy, and things that taste good, and ice cream, etc., etc. And the parent's going to say, no, that's really harmful. It's damaging for you. Same things over here. So the two areas in the physical life where the parents usually get involved is something which will harm the person physically, whether it's mutilation, things like that, so to speak, or whether it's a diet, which could harm the child. The parents decide the diet of the child, obviously. Since Bonei Matem Lashem Elokeichem, we are Hashem's children, we have to leave it into the hands of the parent to decide what's good for us. And by the way, I remember I was once by a Fabrengen from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was talking about, go over to a Jew, and you speak to him about kashrus. Sometimes the Rebbe would, speak like an imaginary case. And in this case, the Rebbe would say, you have to tell the person, just like there's a salt-free diet, just like there's a cholesterol-free diet, there's different sorts of diets. There's a Jew diet. The Eibishter made a diet that's especially specific for Jews, and it's healthy, and it's meant to be for Jews. And this makes the Jew the most healthy. Okay, now, let's go to a whole new deeper level of what does it mean when we say, Bonei Matem Lashem Elokeichem? What's the specialty of bonim, the relationship of parent and child, which makes it unique and different than everything else, and in this way, Yidden are different than all of creation. And that is, if we look at Tanya, chapter 2, everyone knows this chapter, so we're going to spend a couple of minutes of learning it inside and see what the Alter Rebbe is saying. L'chaim, l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'sha'ah kol niyeh b'dvarei. So the Alter Rebbe, in chapter 2, I'll try to make this brief. V'nefesh Hashem b'Yisrael yichelik elikah mimal mamish. Everyone knows these words. The second soul that a Jew has is called second because it becomes more revealed by the Jew when he's bar mitzvah. That level of maturity and consciousness of divinity. So this Jew is by Yisrael, by Yidden, yichelik elikah mimal mamish. It's a veritable part of Hashem. And then he says, bear with me, 3 things. And each one is a contrast. He blew into his nostrils the soul of life. Also Hashem blowing. And he brings from the Zohar that says, whoever blows from his innards. And then he says, the Jews arose in Hashem's thoughts. And then he says, the words from this week's Parsha, you are my children. Okay, now let's talk about the 3 contrasts here. First of all, he brings a contrast, blowing. The Neshamas Yisrael come from the level of blowing. So there's speech, dibur, and then there's vayipach, blowing. And according to Chassidus, we say there's a difference between hevel chitzoni and hevel pnimi. External speech and internal speech. External speech means a speech where you can keep on talking and talking and talking. When you're talking dvarim b'telim, people have a talent, they can go all night just talking small talk. Why? It doesn't take much out of you. It doesn't come from a deep place. It's external, it's superficial. But blowing, like blowing the shofar, how long could you blow a shofar for? Try blowing for 15 minutes straight, see how you're going to feel. Obviously, it's impossible to blow for 15 minutes straight. But even with taking intermissions to gather your breath, you'll still be exhausted. Why? Because like the Alter Rebbe says, the innards of a person comes out when he blows. They say that in karate and martial arts, the inner energy is connected to the deep breathing. So the deep breathing means it comes from your inner power, something which is higher, not just external, like hevel chitzoni, but hevel pnimi. Then he said, after he speaks about Vayikach, he says Yisrael. After he says Vayipach, then he says Yisrael ol machshava. The Yidden came from Hashem's thoughts. Here again, there's a contrast. Machshava also to Dibur. What's the difference between man's thoughts and man's speech? Man's speech is Hashem gave every person makeup. You have a makeup kit that if someone's talking to you, you could smile at them, you could act nice and talk nice, etc., etc. So what's speech? Speech is how you appear. Dibur is lizolasai. Speech is for the other. Machshava, your thoughts, ala atzmi, to yourself. I say that, thank God Hashem made it that other people can't hear my thoughts. If man was able to hear each other's thoughts, we would have had World War III a long time ago. Because what every person thinks about the other person would be broadcast. You understand what I'm saying? It would be a problem. But speech, you could say 2 + 2 is 76. You don't really believe that, but you could say it. So speech is external compared to thought. Thought is to yourself. Your thoughts reveal who you are and what you're thinking to yourself really. Machshava is li'atzmai, again, pnimis, inward, directed. And dibur is lizolosai, it's external. It's your appearance. It's how you communicate to another. You need speech to communicate to another. Machshava you need to communicate to yourself. Now comes the third contrast. Then he says, after he says that we come from speech, then he says, like the ben nimshich me'echav, like the son who comes from the brain of the father. So again, over here too, there's the contrast. There's a parent-child relationship, and there's every other relationship that exists. 1 second, take a pause. I want to go back to Machshava and Dibur for a second. I should have said this right now. And this is the connection to this week's Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, which starts off Basara Mamores, with 10 utterances. Nivra Elam, the world was created. Again, when it talks about creation, all of the rest of creation, we see the theme, the concept of speech. Basara Mamores Nivra Elam, in 10 utterances the world was created. Kihu Omar Vayehi, he spoke and the world came into being. Baruch Ato Hashem, Shehakol Niya B'dvorei. Everything, we make a shahakal, everything, all of the world, all of existence, Niya came into existence, B'dvorei, through a speech. What do we say about the Jews? Yisrael Olu B'machshava. We are the only things, we are the only ones where it says that we come from its thoughts. So same idea. In other words, everything of creation comes from a level of godliness, as God Kaviyachal is making room for something else, for something outside of himself. But when we say Yisrael Machshava, we come from the essence of God, as God is in relation to himself, not as God is going to create. And here comes the bottom line. And it's not the scope within this talk to get into the whole story. Everything in the world is a creation. I see this terms at Elikus Boire Nivra or Elikus Nasa Nivra. When we talk about the rest of creation, Hashem created the world, and he made beings and he made existences. And they are not, they're God because they need Mavadai. Their whole entire existence is dependent on God giving them life every single second. But he created out of ayin, as they say, out of absolute nothingness. Hashem created Bria Yesh Ma'ayin. He made existences. But if you talk about the godly soul, higher than angels, higher than spiritual beings, we say it's a part of God himself. It's not a creation. And that's pshat, that Elikus was Nas and Nivitz, the way God, so to speak, becomes man. He himself becomes a neshama. But a neshama goes into a human body, goes into a body, so therefore it's called Nas and Nivra. And this explains another famous thing that many great thinkers spoke about, that we say that there's four elements of creation. Inanimate, vegetation, the animal kingdom, and humans. But then we say that the Jew is not included in the 4 categories. Then there's a Jew. And the question is, so why don't we say there's 5 categories? Humans and Jew. We say no. Because the Yehudi is not a part of creation. He's really a chelik alikamimal. He's a part of God himself. And that's the difference. Everything else is a creation. And the nefesh alikis, the godly soul of a Jew, is not a part of creation. It's a part of God himself. Now, this is something which we really, really deeply have to think about. And it's the basis of everything. Because if we speak about the bond... Okay, let's take another pause. Let's go now to the next concept. Parent-child relationship. And this will shed light. In every other relationship, similar concept. Chitzonius and Pnimius. In every other relationship that you have, you are not invested. It's not you essentially connected to anything else. You can invest your time, you can invest your energies, you can invest your sweat, you can invest your tears, but you can't even invest you, really. You can invest your blood. But when it comes to a parent-child, we say etzem. It's one and the same. Which means inseparable, unconditional, similar to what we spoke a couple of weeks ago about a Chris's bris, unconditional. And therefore we see with a parent-child relationship, nothing is as deep. There's no other relationship that comes close. If you're married to someone, you can get divorced. You can't get divorced from your child, and your child cannot divorce you. Why? Because every other relationship you could choose. If you say you love that person, it doesn't mean really that you love that person. There's a midah in you, there's an attribute in you. That attribute decides that it likes that person, some quality that's in that person. So it's not your essence, and neither is it to that person's essence. But if we say that you have a child, it's not an attribute in you. It's not that you love in the term of love. He is you. It's you extended into another body. Of course, he has his own personality, his own identity, yada, yada, yada. But still, that point, that it's totally unconditional, and it's forever, and it's essence to essence, is like nothing else. And therefore, number one, a child could touch a parent more deeper than anything else. Like, for example, in the famous analogy of the Baal Shem Tov for Rosh Hashanah, when the child cries, Abba, Abba, when the child cries out, Father, Father, the father will drop everything. He could be in a business meeting that is a $20 million deal, whatever it is. It's nothing compared to my child needs me. You turn to your child with your totality. You're totally there for them. Not your energy, not your time. It's 100%. It's your totality, your whole essence for your child. And when it comes to everything else, it's just not happening at that level. And then comes the second thing, chas v'sholem, if something would happen to your child, that would be tragic. Chas v'sholem, nicht verkenei din gedacht. You will never get over it. When it comes to anything else, you lost a job, it's a relationship with an employee and employer, it's a relationship that was with best friends, even a husband and wife, God forbid, if there has to be a divorce, or if it's a piece of art that you're working for 20 years and by mistake someone kicked it over and smashed the smithereens. All these things are things because they're not coming of your essence, they're not from your essence. So therefore, it could be very, very painful. And we're not minimizing how painful it could be, but there is ultimately some limit to it. It's terrible, it's exceeding, it's sad, it's tragic, but sooner or later, it's possible to get over it. It's possible to get over it, and it's possible to move on. But when it comes to something that happens to a child, it's not possible to move on, ultimately. You'll cope, but there's an ache deep inside of you, because this is a wound, a scar, which touched your very core. Because the parent-child relationship is the deepest, unconditional, immobile relationship that could be. And the famous explanation Chassidus gives is about, we say that Yafa koyach ben mikoyach av, that it's possible that the child should be better than the parent. So the famous analogy is given, the mashal is, you could have two parents that are blind, and they have a child that could see. Stelzer the Kasha, we have the question, how is it possible that the child should have something the parents don't have? How could an extension be more than the source? So according to science, it's very easy because the DNA of the parents has the site. And that's exactly what the answer is. I'll see this in different language. If the child came from a level of the parents that was their koiches hagiluyim, their revealed faculties, so then, just like we say the parents are missing something in a certain level, in the giluyim, in the revealed faculties, so therefore the child would also be missing that. Because where does he come from? From the level of revealed faculties. But if you say that where does the child come from? Etzem ha'av, etzem ha'em. In other words, you could say he comes from the essential potentiality of man. And that's the very essence of man. So, and that's how Chassidus interprets, Yofa koyach haben. This that the child can be better than the father, that itself is mi koyach ha'av. Yofa koyach haben. How can it be that a child can be more? Mi koyach ha'av. That's because that itself comes from the Father, because it comes from the essence of the Father. And the essence of the Father is complete. And this is what we have to wrap our brains around. When we say, Ani, l'doidi. Ani is talking about my totality. L'doidi, to my beloved. I'm not pledging allegiance with my fingers. I'm not pledging allegiance with my nose. I'm not pledging allegiance with my mouth. I'm pledging allegiance with my totality. Ani, my very identity. My etzem. Etzem to etzem. Ani l'doidi, l'doidi li. And this is what we have to think about when we talk about Hashem. It's actually mind-boggling that Chassidus and Kabbalah emphasizes this. Just to emphasize this a bit, I know it's already late. But you know, when you speak to a regular person, let's say you'll ask him about God, and you'll say, could have God created different worlds? The answer is, of course. Do we know what God is thinking about? Could he be thinking about who knows what? Someone will say, of course. What happens if we tell you that a Pi Kabbalah and a Pi Chassidus, God has nothing better, higher, deeper to think about than you? You! That's what it means, Machshavton Shel Yisrael, Kodmo L'chol Davar. We are a reflection, and we are connected, not with God as God lowers himself, not as God as creator, not as God as manager, not as God as conductor, not as God as governor, not as God as president, not as God as ruler, not as God as king. We are connected to the Eibishter as the Eibishter is in relation to himself. From Hashem's Machshavah. We're not related to God as God lowers himself to create a world. We're preceding creation. Machshavton Shel Yisrael Kodmo L'chol Davar. And when a person thinks like that the level of Hashem is totally unfathomable, and we're saying we are right there in that level of his unfathomability, or if there's such a word, then it blows your mind to think, waking up in the morning, that Hashem b'chol atzmusai, in all of his essence, that is beyond words, that is beyond description, that we have no idea about, is looking at you, Yankel, Beryl, Shmerel, and tells you, I love you, I want the best for you. And that brings out such a love to Hashem that we should proclaim Ani l'doidi, to arouse, ignite that feeling of love to Hashem. And this is what this week's parasha, Boni Matem L'Hashem Elokeichem, is all about. I just saw a video recently where there was a certain family, Butman. They lived in France. The Rebbe came to France to pick up his mother, and then he parted with this family. And then they came to America a couple of years later. They went to a private audience of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, Kinderlach. They were children, and they were still young. The children of this family. And the Rebbe turned to them and he said, Kinderlach, ich gedenk euch. He says, Kinderlach, children, I remember you. He told them. And then the Rebbe said, Ich gedenk euch, aber ihr gedenkt mir? The Rebbe said, I remember you, Kinderlach, I remember you. Do you remember me? So think about it. Let's talk about Hashem now. This is what the Eibishter is telling us today. Shabbos Mevorachim Chodesh Elul. Boni Matem L'Hashem Elokeichem. Kinderlach. Ich gedenk euch. I remember you. Ihr gedenkt mir, but do you remember me? So the Eibishter should help. We should arouse within ourselves this tremendous feeling of love. We should be drowning in the love. We should be suffused by the love, infused by the love. And this should be the underlying theme of the entire month. And stress this love. Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. And the Eibishter will help, and we will arouse our essential love to him. He will arouse his essential love to us. And out of that essential love will come to the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish, posting from my home, Be'ez Shem Yisbarich, your man in Melbourne.